So you want to make a really good cheesecake. Today I am sharing a recipe that is perfect for beginners. It's also going to satisfy advanced bakers, and it's not fussy. There's no water bath required. And every time I make it, it gets rave reviews. First thing I want to talk about is our oven temperature. Preheat your oven to a nice low temperature of 325 degrees Fahrenheit. We will be baking this cheesecake in the center rack. You don't want to bake it too close to your heating elements or too far in the bottom of your oven. Right in the center is perfect. While that's preheating, let's make the crust. The crust itself comes together very easily. You will need 1.5 cups of graham cracker crumbs. We'll add 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and then just 1 tablespoon of firmly packed light brown sugar. Just adds like a little extra something. I'm going to stir the sugar into the graham cracker crumbs. Oops, try not to make a mess. Then we'll add our butter. You'll need 7 tablespoons of butter for the crust. Don't stress too much over using salted versus unsalted. Either one really works fine. If I have the choice and have both in my fridge, I will grab the salted for this. Now, you don't want the butter to be super hot either. You want it to be melted. You guys know we don't waste butter. All your butter in here, and then just use a fork to toss everything together. We want all of the graham cracker crumbs to be moistened. Nikki gave me a bowl that she's capable of using, but I am not. Honestly, this could have been worse. So once we have all of our crumbs moistened, we're going to press them into our Springform pan. You'll need a 9-inch Springform pan for this recipe. You really do need a Springform. A cake pan doesn't work very well. A good Springform pan can be hard to find. I will try to remember to link to the one I use in the description. Okay, so we talked about how easy the crust is to make, and it really is, but how you put your crust into the pan can make or break your cheesecake 100%. Something that I've learned in the many years I've been making cheesecakes is that lots of people will just press their crust into the bottom of the pan and call it a day, which is fine. However, when the cheesecake bakes, it's going to sort of bake into the side of the pan. And then as it cools, you have this tension where it tries to constrict, and that causes a lot of your cracks. I'd say most of the time when I would end up with cracks in the past, it was due to this tension. So you know how you can easily avoid that? One thing you could do is you could run a knife between the cheesecake and the pan after the cheesecake is baked, like immediately after it comes out of the oven. But a more surefire way to help prevent that tension is to simply press the crust all the way up, or as high up as you can, the sides of the pan. So if your crust is higher than your cheesecake batter, then what happens is as that cools, the crust easily constricts with the cheesecake, so you don't have that tension and no cracks are going to happen. Of course, this is reliant on you doing all of the other steps and techniques properly, but this is one of the easiest ways to go from cracked cheesecake to perfect cheesecakes. Now, the exact crust I used, I weirdly get comments sometimes from people saying that the crust recipe I use is not enough to press up the side of a pan. I'm not sure why. I think people are just thinking they need more on the bottom than they really do. Just a pretty thin layer on the bottom is fine. You could always simply make more crust, but I've never had to do that. It should be enough to go all the way up the sides, or most of the way up the sides of your pan. All right, now let's say you make the crust and you're panicking because you just can't get your crust up as high as you want it to be. Don't panic. Immediately after your cheesecake finishes baking, before you start to let it cool in the oven, you're just going to take a small knife and you are going to very carefully separate the cheesecake from the pan. Just run the knife between the cheesecake and the pan, anywhere the cheesecake is touching the pan and not the crust. That will loosen it and will also get rid of any tension you might have. All right, our crust is prepped. We do not need to bake it. We don't need to put it in the fridge. So you could if you really wanted to. We're just going to set it aside and make our cheesecake filling. You will need a large mixing bowl for this, and either a stand mixer fitted with a paddle attachment or an electric hand mixer, which is what I'm going to be using today. Or if you have really good arm strength, you could just do it by hand. Just make sure your cream cheese is soft enough. And that's actually what I want to talk to you about next. Ingredient temperature matters, specifically when it comes to our cream cheese and our eggs. They should be at room temperature or really close before we make the recipe. The sour cream, you have a little bit more wiggle room, but your cream cheese and eggs should be room temperature. This is important for making the cheesecake batter smooth and lump-free and incorporating everything really well, and also incorporating it well without overbeating it, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute because it's also important. Cream cheese, you're going to be using 4 bricks. This is 32 ounces of full-fat brick-style cream cheese. Unfortunately, the type of cream cheese that is sold in a tub, it has other additives in it that can make it bake up funny and not set properly, so I really recommend the brick-style cream cheese. We'll add this into a mixing bowl. It's a little funny, but that'll work. And we'll add our sugar in with this. This is 1 cup of granulated sugar, and I'm just going to stir this on low speed until the sugar and cream cheese are well well combined. See how easily my beater like works through that? This is nice and soft. It shouldn't be warm, but it should be soft and very easy to mix. You really could probably do this by hand, but we're using a mixer. We're going to keep it on low speed and stir just until everything's combined and lump-free. We'll pause here and we will scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl with a spatula. We'll be doing this a fair bit during the process of making this recipe. We want to check that there are no lumps. Cold cream cheese is one of the biggest ways that you end up with lumps, or using cold eggs that sort of re-solidify the pieces you may not have made as smooth as you thought you did. So this looks great. And cheesecake really is quite easy to make. Just remember these techniques and it'll take you no time at all and you'll have really good results. All right, next we will add our sour cream. This is 2/3 cup of sour cream. I think sour cream is one of the ingredients in cheesecake that really can make or break it. I've encountered a fair number of recipes that actually don't use sour cream at all, and I think they just fall flat in flavor. I think they are just kind of sad. Sour cream is just a key ingredient for excellent depth of flavor, and it's going to make your cheesecake better, so you should use it. Next, we'll add vanilla extract. You need 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla, 3 of my little half teaspoons here. And we're also going to add just a little bit of salt. I add just 1/8 teaspoon, which is such a small bit, but it does make a difference. Cream cheese itself has salt in it, so you don't need to add a whole lot, but a pinch does go a long way. So we're going to stir this again, low speed, just until combined. And again, we'll pause, scrape the sides and bottom. You need to do this whether you're doing it by hand or with a stand mixer, but if you're using a stand mixer, be especially conscious of the fact that the bottom of the bowl usually has like a divot and lumpy pieces of cream cheese like to hide there. Don't let that happen to you. Almost there. I'm going to do another quick mix before we move on to the eggs, which are a big deal. So this is in pretty good shape. Let's talk about our eggs. You need 4 large eggs for this recipe, and they should be, again, room temperature or close. Let me grab a fork because we are going to crack the eggs one at a time. We're going to add them to the batter one at a time, and we're just going to lightly beat them in our measuring cup before we add them to the batter, and we'll stir on low speed until that's just combined before we repeat with the next egg. So that's just combined, we'll move on to the next one. If we were to add all of the eggs at once, or if they were cold, or we didn't beat them first, it just requires more mixing and more vigorous mixing to incorporate them. The cold temperature could actually sort of shock the cream cheese and make you more likely to have lumps, which also will require more mixing. But the problem is when we're mixing on high speed or mixing a lot, we're incorporating a lot of air into the batter. What that air does is it's going to cause your cheesecake to puff in the oven, and then it's going to deflate as it cools, and that's going to cause cracks. So it takes an extra minute to add the eggs one at a time, but it's worth the time to do it right. Now don't be afraid to mix it until it's uniform. It's important that the batter is uniform and that it's well combined. You just don't want to overdo it. Scrape the sides and bottom. I meant to do this after we added our last egg and our 4th egg. So I can tell we're not perfect yet, but I'm going to finish this with my spatula. And I'm just checking now to make sure we're nice and uniform, which we pretty much are. That's super important, right? So like I mentioned, don't worry so much about not over mixing that you don't have a uniform batter, because that would even be worse. No lumps, we're perfect. Let's bring back our graham cracker crust, and we will pour the batter right into the middle. We'll see how good of a job I did pressing the crust high up the edges. Don't want to leave any batter behind. Spread this into an even layer. Don't touch the crust though. It'll even itself out some in the oven, but I like to give it a head start. So I mentioned I really like the Springform pan, and I do. And at this point I can really trust it, but I still always use insurance. Springform pans can leak, so I always recommend baking on a foil or parchment lined rimmed baking sheet just in case you have any leaking. Then it's going to catch it, and it's a lot easier to clean up a pan with foil on it than it is to clean up your oven that's covered in dripping butter. Ask me how I know. Now this is going into the center rack of our 325-degree Fahrenheit oven, and it's going to bake for about 50 to 60 minutes. Now to tell that a cheesecake is done, we're just going to gently jostle the cheesecake. We're looking for the edges to be set, or at least mostly set, but the center should still be jiggly. Now once you've hit that point, what you're going to do is turn off your oven, crack the door about 2 inches, and you're going to let it cool in the oven for an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. After that point, pull it out to room temperature, let it cool a little bit more until it no longer feels warm to the touch, and then pop it into your refrigerator. Now at this point, there is still some chilling that needs to happen. The cheesecake needs to chill on the refrigerator for at least 6 hours, preferably overnight, before you can slice into it. All right, the next day we are ready to cut into this cheesecake. I get a lot of questions about the Springform collar. I always leave it on until I'm ready to serve, and then if I have any leftovers, I pop that Springform collar right back on and store it that way in the fridge. Let's go ahead and release it. This should come out beautifully. Let's go ahead and cut a slice. Time to cut the cheesecake. Wipe off our knife blade between cuts if we want to be fancy. All right, let's take a look. That is a good cheesecake. Imagine you make your first ever cheesecake and it comes out like that. Perfection. This cheesecake, I usually don't add anything to it. Plain is perfection. But if you want to get a little fancy, just gonna serve it with a nice little side of whipped cream. Looks pretty. I'm not even gonna put it on top. And some of my gigantic blueberries. That adds a nice touch. I don't think you'll go back to making a cheesecake any other way. And look at that, no water bath required. Perfect texture, perfectly crack-free. I really hope this was helpful. If you like this video, I think you will like my new cookbook that will be out soon. Go ahead to the description where there's a link to pre-order. This recipe, one of my personal favorites, is featured in the cookbook. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. All right, my favorite part of the day. Let's cut a nice slice. I mean, that's the perfect texture. That's it. You're not gonna get better than that with a water bath. It's so good. That's why I put it in my cookbook. I think sour cream is one of the ingredients in cream cheese that really makes it. Nothing to see here. A lot more, I just gotta make sure not, nope, I did get some shell in there. Giant piece of shell. A lot of air, a little bit of shell hiding there. You end up incorporating a lot of shell left. Oh, making such a mess.